The longest silence hides the deadliest rage, and the final judgment is always written by the victim.
I used to believe silence was something you chose. A pause, a break, a moment of peace. I know better now. Silence isn't gentle. It's what settles in when something is taken from you and the world decides it's done talking about it. It presses down slowly, day after day, until you stop noticing the weight and start carrying it like it belongs to you. My name is Evelyn Harper. I still answer to it when people say it, but it feels borrowed now, like a coat that doesn't quite fit anymore. The woman who owned that name disappeared the night my house burned down and my husband died inside it. Everything since then has felt like an afterimage, a continuation that wasn't supposed to exist. We lived in a small town in the Midwest, the kind of place people describe as quiet and safe because nothing ever changes there. Streets lined with the same houses, the same cars parked in the same driveways, the same faces at the same counters every morning. People waved whether they liked you or not. They asked how you were doing without waiting for the answer. I thought that meant community. I thought that meant security. I didn't understand that it also meant everyone was watching and no one was really seeing. Daniel fit into that town perfectly. He knew how to talk to people, how to make them feel comfortable without revealing much of himself. He remembered birthdays, shook hands firmly, smiled at the right moments. People trusted him easily, okay? They trusted him more than they trusted themselves sometimes. I trusted him too, okay? That was the foundation of our marriage, or at least that's what I told myself. Looking back, it feels less like trust and more like habit. The night of the fire didn't arrive with drama. There was no warning, no strange feeling in my chest, no sense that everything I knew was about to end. It was ordinary. That's what haunts me the most. Dinner dishes in the sink, the television murmuring in the background. Daniel said he was tired and went to bed earlier than usual. I remember noticing it, registering it, and then letting it go. He did that sometimes. Or maybe I only remembered the times it fit the version of him I believed in. I stayed up on the couch, scrolling through my phone, barely paying attention to whatever was on the screen. My thoughts were unfocused, scattered, work, bills, nothing important, nothing that mattered. I smelled smoke and felt irritated more than afraid. It was faint at first, like someone burning wood far away. I stood up, annoyed, thinking something outside was wrong. Maybe a neighbor's fireplace? Maybe trash burning somewhere it shouldn't. By the time I realized it was inside the house, the air had already changed. It felt thick, wrong, like breathing through fabric. My eyes burned. I remember calling Daniel's name, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, still expecting an answer. I don't remember reaching the hallway, but they told me later that I did. I don't remember the heat until it was too much to ignore. I remember being pulled backward, hands gripping my arms, someone shouting that it was too late. Outside, everything felt unreal, the cold against my bare feet. A blanket around my shoulders that didn't feel warm. Flames climbing through the windows like they belonged there. I kept asking where my husband was. Over and over. Each time the pause before the answer stretched longer. When someone finally told me they couldn't reach him, the words didn't land. They hovered, meaningless, waiting for me to catch up. Later, they would say it was an accident. Faulty wiring, old house. It's a tragedy, but no one's fault. They said these things quickly, confidently, like repeating them enough times would make them true. I didn't argue. I didn't know how. I was too busy trying to understand how a life could disappear so completely in the span of a few minutes. The sheriff came to see me the next morning. He sat across from me at a borrowed kitchen table, his posture careful, his voice calm. He explained what they believed had happened, even though the investigation hadn't finished yet. Maybe it never really started. He told me I was lucky to be alive. He said these things happen. He said there was no sign of foul play. I nodded because it felt easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear answers to. The funeral came and went in a blur. Closed casket. Too many people. Too many hands touching my arms, my back, my shoulders. People cried loudly, spoke softly, told me how strong I was. They described Daniel in ways that felt familiar but distant, like they were talking about a character we all knew rather than a man I had lived with. Loving husband, honest man. Lost to the community. I stood there, listening, wondering when someone would say something that felt real. Afterward, there was nothing to go back to. The house was gone, reduced to a blackened shell behind caution tape. My belongings fit into a few borrowed bags. I moved from couch to couch, pretending it was temporary even as the days stretched into weeks. At night, I lay awake, replaying the same moments, searching for a detail I had missed. Why didn't I wake up sooner? Why did Daniel go to bed early that night? Why didn't he answer when I called his name? At first, people checked on me constantly, messages, visits, offers of help. Then it slowed, then it stopped. Grief makes other people uncomfortable when it lingers too long. The town returned to its routines. I stayed suspended, trapped in a moment everyone else was eager to forget. The first thing that truly unsettled me happened at the insurance office. It was a temporary setup, folding tables and mismatched chairs, everything smelling faintly of burnt paper and coffee. I was signing documents without reading them when a woman looked at me and asked if I was Daniel's wife. When I said yes, her expression shifted. Not shock, not sympathy, just surprise. Like she had expected a different answer. She apologized quickly, blamed exhaustion, but the look stayed with me. It didn't feel like a mistake. After that, I started noticing small things. Conversations that ended when I walked into a room. Neighbors who suddenly seemed busy when they saw me coming. The sheriff not returning my calls when I asked about the final report. The insurance payout arriving faster than expected, larger than expected, larger than the house was worth. Each detail on its own meant nothing. Together, they formed a shape I didn't want to see. When they finally allowed me back onto the property, I didn't expect to find anything. Most of what we owned was gone, reduced to ash and warped metal. I walked through what was left carefully, like the ground might give way beneath me. In the garage, buried under debris, I found a metal lockbox. It was scorched but intact. I didn't remember it at first. Then I did. Tried the code without thinking. Our anniversary. It opened immediately. Inside were documents I had never seen. Insurance policies with unfamiliar terms. Names and addresses I didn't recognize. There was a second phone, damaged but still functional enough to show missed calls and messages. All from numbers saved as initials instead of names. And there was a photograph, printed, folded, almost untouched by the fire. Daniel stood in it with a woman I didn't know, his arm around her waist, his smile relaxed and genuine. The same smile he used on me. I sat on the concrete floor with that box in my lap for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't feel shocked. Something inside me simply settled, like a truth I had been circling without realizing it. My husband had not been the man I thought he was, and he had not died the way they said he did. That was the moment grief changed. It didn't disappear. It hardened. It became quieter, more focused. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, or how deep this went, or how many people were involved. I only knew one thing for certain. The fire didn't erase the truth. It only showed me how many people were willing to help bury it. I didn't tell anyone about the lockbox, not at first. I put everything back the way I found it, closed it, hid it under the debris again, like I was afraid it might accuse me of something if I carried it out in the open. Then I left the property and sat in my car for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I understood, in a way that felt physical, that the version of my life where I trusted other people to handle the truth had ended. Grief is loud in the beginning. People expect tears, breakdowns, visible pain. What they don't know how to handle is when grief goes quiet. When it turns inward and starts organizing itself, that's what mine did. It stopped asking why and started asking how. I began small. I reread every document from the lockbox late at night, cross-checking names and addresses on my phone. Some lead nowhere. Others led to businesses that existed only on paper or offices that had closed years ago. I learned quickly that Daniel had been very careful. He didn't leave trails, he left fragments. Enough to confuse anyone who wasn't looking closely. Enough to pass as coincidence. The second phone was harder. It still turned on, but the screen flickered and the battery drained fast. Most of the messages were short. Arriving late at night, leaving early in the morning. No affection, no emotion. Just logistics, times, places, initials instead of names. Whoever he had been talking to didn't want records either. I deleted nothing. I copied everything. During the day, I played the role people expected. The widow who was still numb, still broken. I thanked people for their concern. I told them I was taking things one day at a time. It was true, in a way. I just didn't tell them what I was doing with those days. People believe what fits neatly into their understanding. They don't look deeper unless you force them to. The first person I followed was the woman in the photograph. Her name took time to find. It wasn't written anywhere. I recognized the background instead. A cheap bar outside town, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen by anyone they knew. I drove there one afternoon and sat in the parking lot for nearly an hour before going inside. The bartender didn't recognize Daniel when I showed her the photo, or pretended not to. But she recognized the woman immediately. "She comes in sometimes," she said too casually. "Used to, anyway." Her name was Lila. She lived alone, worked odd hours, and didn't talk much about her past. People in town had opinions about her. None of them were kind. That made it easier to dismiss her. That made her useful. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I watched instead. I learned where she lived, when she worked, who she talked to. I learned that Daniel hadn't been special to her. He had been one of several men who came and went, all with money, all with secrets, that hurt more than I expected. Not because of jealousy, because it meant my marriage hadn't even been unique in its betrayal. The more I learned, the clearer the pattern became. Daniel had been involved in something bigger than an affair, something that required insurance policies, shell companies, and people willing to look the other way, something that benefited more than one person. I tried the sheriff again, left messages, sent emails. Each one went unanswered. When I finally ran into him in person at the grocery store, he smiled like nothing was wrong. Asked how I was holding up, told me the final report would be ready soon. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. That was the first time I felt anger burn through the numbness. I requested copies of the fire investigation myself. What I received was thin. 2 thin pages missing. Conclusions without explanations. It read like something written to close a case, not solve it. Faulty wiring, no accelerants detected. No signs of forced entry. Clean, convenient. Finished at night, I started dreaming about the fire differently. Not the flames. The silence before them. The way Daniel had kissed my forehead and walked away without looking back. Okay? In the dreams, he always knew something I didn't. He was always ahead of me. The lockbox led me to another name eventually. Caleb, right? Local businessman, real estate, insurance consulting. K, man whose name came up in town meetings and charity events. Someone people trusted. Someone Daniel had trusted too, apparently. The insurance policies were connected to him, not directly. Nothing was direct, but the lines all curved back to the same place. I attended one of his public events under the excuse of courtesy. He shook my hand, offered condolences, told me Daniel had been a good man. His grip was firm. His smile practiced. When he said my name, it felt rehearsed, like he had said it many times before without me present. I watched how people responded to him, how they deferred, how the sheriff lingered nearby like a guard dog. It was a small town, but power still existed. It just wore friendlier faces. By then, I understood something important. Whatever happened to Daniel, wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was planned, carefully, quietly. And it worked because everyone involved trusted that no one would dig too deeply, especially not me. That was their mistake. I stopped sleeping on couches and rented a cheap room at an old motel on the edge of town. The kind of place people used when they didn't want a paper trail tied to their home. I paid in cash. I spread my notes across the bed every night and started connecting what I had. Names, dates, payments, patterns. It wasn't about proving anything in court. Not anymore. It was about understanding the structure. Who benefited? Who protected whom? I realized then that Daniel's death wasn't just convenient. It was necessary. Something had gone wrong. Or he had become a liability. The fire wasn't about money alone. It was about erasing a problem. That knowledge settled in me slowly, heavily. The man I had loved had been dangerous in ways I never saw. And the people who killed him were still walking around freely, smiling at neighbors, shaking hands, living their lives uninterrupted. I didn't feel fear, not the way I expected to. What I felt was clarity. I knew I couldn't expose them openly. The town wouldn't support me. The system wouldn't protect me. I would be labeled unstable, grieving, desperate. I had already seen how quickly they closed ranks. How easily truth was smothered by familiarity. So I made a different decision. I stopped being visible. I changed my routines, my appearance, the way I spoke to people. I let the widow version of me fade into the background. People stopped paying attention when they thought they already understood you. That invisibility was a gift. I began preparing without telling myself exactly what I was preparing for. I gathered information. I documented everything. I learned where people felt safe, where they felt untouchable. I listened more than I spoke. I waited. By the end of that second month, I knew more about the town than I ever had when I lived there as someone's wife. I knew who lied easily, who avoided eye contact, who drank too much when they were nervous. I knew who would panic if pressed and who would sacrifice someone else to protect themselves. And somewhere along the way, I accepted something else. This wasn't about justice anymore. Not in the way people like to imagine it. It was about balance, about making sure the silence they built didn't stay intact. They thought the fire was the end of the story. It wasn't. It was the point where I started paying attention. By the time I fully accepted what had to be done, the idea no longer felt dangerous. That was the most unsettling part. Fear is supposed to stop you, supposed to raise alarms, make you hesitate, force you to reconsider. When fear disappears, it doesn't mean you're brave. It means you've adjusted to a reality where certain lines no longer exist. I didn't become someone else overnight. There was no clear moment where I decided to take control or seek revenge or rewrite the ending of my life. What happened was slower and quieter. Hope dissolved first. Not dramatically, not with tears, but the way a color fades from fabric after too many washes. I stopped believing someone would come forward. I stopped believing the truth would matter just because it was true. Once that belief was gone, everything else rearranged itself naturally. I had spent weeks collecting information, but information alone doesn't change anything. Systems don't collapse because someone knows the truth. They collapse when the truth becomes inconvenient, when it costs more to hide it than to let it surface. I understood that instinctively, even before I could articulate it. The men who had built this structure didn't fear morality. They feared instability. Daniel hadn't been special to them. That realization hurt more than discovering his lies. I had wanted his death to mean something, even if that meaning was betrayal. But to them, he was a component, a participant who had grown unpredictable. He had learned enough to be dangerous. Maybe he wanted more money. Maybe he wanted out. Maybe he believed he was protected. Whatever the reason, he became a variable they could no longer control. And variables get removed. Once I saw that, the story simplified. It wasn't personal to them. That made it easier to dismantle. I stayed invisible on purpose. Grief had made me unremarkable, and I leaned into that. I wore neutral clothes. I kept my hair plain. Spoke less than I used to. People rarely notice what doesn't demand attention. The town slowly stopped registering my presence at all. To them, I was already gone. Every night, I organized what I knew. Fires, insurance claims, property transfers, shell companies. On their own, they looked unrelated. Together, they formed a rhythm. Same language in different reports, same delays. Same payouts adjusted just enough to avoid scrutiny. Daniel hadn't invented any of it. He had stepped into an existing machine and benefited until he didn't. Lila was never meant to be part of the ending. She was a witness who didn't realize she was one. When I finally stopped circling her and spoke directly, she didn't deny anything. She didn't need to. Her fear had been growing long before I arrived. She talked about Daniel differently than I expected. Not lovingly, not bitterly. She spoke about him like someone who had been running out of time. She told me about a meeting weeks before the fire. A meeting that left him shaken, angry. She said he drank too much afterward, talked too much, complained about being cut out. He believed he deserved a larger share. He believed loyalty mattered. That told me everything I needed to know. Loyalty only exists until it becomes inconvenient. I didn't promise Lila safety. I didn't threaten her either. I told her the truth. That she was expendable to them. That when pressure came, she would be the first name offered up. She knew it already. Fear makes people honest. She gave me details, times, places, connections, enough to confirm what I already suspected. Caleb Wright had built his life on appearing indispensable. He was careful, but his care was repetitive. He trusted patterns that had protected him before. He trusted the town to value stability over truth. And most of all, he trusted that someone like me wouldn't matter. That assumption was his blind spot. I never confronted him. Confrontation would have given him something to fight. Instead, I let doubt seep into the places he relied on most. Business partners, investors, insurers. I sent no accusations, only documents. I let people draw conclusions on their own. When people believe they've discovered something themselves, they protect that belief fiercely. Meetings were delayed, calls went unanswered, deals stalled. Caleb tried to compensate by tightening control, which only made things worse. Control looks like guilt when applied too forcefully. The same structure that once protected him began to collapse inward, slowly and quietly. The sheriff was never loyal to anyone but himself. Men like him don't need threats. They need reminders. I let him notice that I noticed inconsistencies, that I remembered details others overlooked, that I wasn't as broken as he believed. I never accused him. I let the possibility of exposure do the work. He started distancing himself from Caleb on his own. When pressure rises, alliances dissolve. Another fire occurred months later. Different county, similar pattern. This time, investigators hesitated. They asked questions that hadn't been asked before. That hesitation mattered more than any accusation. Once a pattern is suspected, denial becomes harder to maintain. Systems rely on momentum. Interrupt that, and everything slows. Caleb attempted to reduce his footprint, selling assets, transferring funds, preparing to disappear without admitting guilt. But shrinking draws attention when you've spent years expanding. People noticed. Whispers began. Support thinned. The town that once protected him turned cautious. When authorities finally intervened, it wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, mundane. That's how real consequences usually arrive. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. This was never about witnessing punishment. It was about restoring imbalance. It's about making silence expensive. I left town quietly, the way I had learned to do everything else. I took nothing sentimental. Nothing that tied me to a life that no longer existed. On my way out, I passed the empty lot where my house once stood. Grass had grown back. If you didn't know what happened there, you'd never guess. That felt appropriate. Fire erases evidence. Time erases memory. I wasn't interested in preserving either. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Daniel. Not with longing, with clarity. I think about the man I didn't know. The choices he made when I wasn't watching. The confidence he had that the world would keep bending around him. Loving someone doesn't make them innocent. Losing them doesn't make them a victim. People imagine revenge as something loud, explosive, a confrontation, confession. Violence, that version exists to comfort people who believe the world is fair and that closure is something you can demand. Real revenge is quieter. It looks like consequences unfolding naturally. It looks like people destroying themselves with the systems they built to harm others. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't need to. I stopped protecting the lies that kept them safe. My name still exists, still answer to it when necessary, but it doesn't define me anymore. Names are just labels we carry until they burn away. The fire that killed my husband was meant to end a problem. Instead, it created one. And this time, the silence didn't survive.